What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the show. We are just a few days away from Ramadan, and I am pumped. And being that Ramadan could be Thursday and today's Monday, I'll bet your masjid probably just got started preparing. I'm just kidding. Taking a dig at Muslim Standard Time and our community's last minute nature of doing things. However, that does not mean we don't have a serious problem. So, first off, if you're seeing this in Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak, may we all live to benefit from this month for many years to come. Ameen. And I want to really talk a few things about fixing our community's PR because it is a huge problem and our community has traditionally not really invested in it. So I want to start by saying what PR is and what PR is not. And then we're going to go through the nuts and bolts of a PR plan, cover some very specific things like who your key audiences are. That's plural. And then also looking at like your facility and how that relates directly to public relations. First and foremost, though, I need you guys to know what public relations really is. Number one, it is not spin or smoke and mirrors. I know that's the phrase. Someone says something and it sounds good and you're like, oh, that's just PR. Yeah, that's a reality for a lot of people, but good PR is authentic and great PR. That actually helps create lasting relationships that are mutually beneficial. And in fact, I focus on mutually beneficial because the Public Relations Society of America defines public relations as helping an organization and its publics. Again, notice the plural, publics, mutually adapt to one another. So what does this mean? Well, first and foremost, we should know who our audiences are. And that brings me to kind of the 6 things that make up a really good PR plan. And that's 5 W's plus an H. Okay, so 5 W's plus an H. The first W is who. Who are your target audience? Who are your secondary audience? And on and on. And then how will you and who will be responsible for being involved to implement outreach to those audiences? Next, so the second W of the 5 is why. What's the overall goal or purpose of your PR plan or effort? What's the desired outcome you want to see? That could be that we've reached our neighbors we've never reached before. If you're operating a masjid in a area that's close to a neighborhood, it could be that you want to increase your donors, so you're reaching out to people who have been previous supporters but maybe have stopped. It could be, and it could be a combination of all these things. It also could be to reach out to non-Muslims and get them educated about Islam, and on and on and on. You'll have your own unique PR goals, and in fact, the more specific, the better, and you should tailor plans to the why. After that is the what. Is it going to be a one-time event? Is it going to be a launch of a new project, a new class? Is it a celebration, an anniversary? Are you doing a fundraiser? Do you have a kickoff event for some kind of groundbreaking? You have to create messaging that will resonate with your internal communities and audiences and your external communities and audiences. And we'll get more into that in a minute. Then you have where. Where will the public relations take place? Will it be online? Will it be on mass media, traditional media, new media, in print newspapers, in person? And then after that, how will you publicize it? And then finally, when? What are the dates of this PR plan and effort? And then finally, we get to the H. How? Well, all the logistics need to be figured out. Who's responsible for implementing it? Who's responsible and how will we fund it? That all comes into the H. So again, we had 5 W's plus an H. That's who, why, what, where, when, and how. Now, I want to get into your key Ramadan audiences. This is so important, y'all, because messaging should be tailored to the people you're trying to reach. If you ever seen that movie Avatar, that's not what I'm talking about here. In PR, you do an avatar of your target audiences. So like you could interview a few people of a particular age and demographic. So it could be, an age range and then an ethnic or educational level or economic level background. And then you would basically kind of create a persona of your ideal audience member that you're trying to reach. And then you customize your messages to that person as if you're talking to an individual. That's what an avatar is. And you're going to have multiple avatars if you go through that exercise. But that's also a little bit unnecessary because your key audiences for Ramadan as a masjid or an Islamic organization or a Muslim advocacy organization are first and foremost your team, your employers, your volunteers, your board, especially your volunteers, y'all. So when you treat your employees and your volunteers really well, then they give excellent service. I'm talking to the board here. A lot of times, as Muslims, we tend to think of everything as fi sabilillah, for God's sake. So we should pay little. We should expect people to be grateful for the opportunity to serve. And that's all true. But that doesn't mean that you don't reward good effort and you don't encourage people, smile, and actually pay people fair wages. The second audience, and this is probably the second most important, I built this in order of importance. So the first importance is your team, especially the volunteers. and then the employees, and then the board. Then the second key audience is the musalliin, the people who attend prayers there. And I'm first talking, there's two levels. There's the ones who regularly attend, then there's actually three levels. The ones who regularly attend daily prayers, if you're a masjid, then the ones who just attend Jummah, and then the ones who only come in Ramadan. And so that would be the pecking order for the musalliin, or the people in your congregation. Third are your donors. Now, I put the musalliin first because they're there day in and day out. The donors are the people that make everything happy, though, so that everything happen. Hopefully, also make them happy. But the point here is that donors could arguably be the first priority, depending on what your PR campaign is all about. The donors, in just a general sense, I think come in as number three because they overlap with the volunteers, the board, and the musalliin. Then after that, in order of importance again, is your neighbors. Now, this could be if you're a small mosque in a strip center, it could be businesses, other congregations that are in the same strip center as you. If you are a larger mosque and you're in a residential neighborhood, it could literally be neighbors, individual homesteads with people and families living there. And then if you are in kind of a area that has a lot of congregations around, it could be the churches, synagogues, temples, and gurdwaras that are all right next to you. But your neighbors can come incredibly close to the donors. After that, and this is again in order of importance, I put law enforcement. And the reason for this is they would be the ones protecting you should you come under threats, should you need traffic control and things like that. You can always hire security, but law enforcement, especially in uniform, tends to be the best option. Then you have first responders, people like EMTs, ambulance drivers, firefighters. Those people come immediately after law enforcement. And then after that, elected officials, and then civic leaders. Now, what do I mean by civic leaders? I mean people who lead other nonprofits, who lead churches, synagogues, who lead advocacy groups like, let's say, the NAACP, the ACLU, your local care chapter, all these different groups that are serving the community. If you're a masjid, if you are an advocacy organization, again, other civic leaders becomes really important. Then after civic leaders becomes the mass media, and it could be online media, new media, blogs, newspapers, any kind of media outreach that you would be doing. And then lastly, what I call Ramadan nomads, people who just like, especially if you live in a big city like Chicago or Houston, and public transit is pretty good, or you have people that are attached to their cars, and they just see as many masajid as they can. They go from one place to the next. I put those kind of last on the list because they're not a regular attendee, and they're just there maybe for 1 or 2 nights. But you should also be thinking about that. That could also include non-Muslims curious about Islam. Because of Ramadan, our community is going to be in the news and media interest is going to be spiked. Okay, so after all of those things, we need to think about your spaces. And again, I did this in terms of importance. So the first thing I want you guys to really pay attention to, especially if you're a mosque or a masjid with a community center, is think in terms of safety. First and foremost, hazards to the public and hazards to your congregation. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about how that breaks down. The other thing when it comes to safety, and this is really important right now with ICE raids happening, and they have happened at houses of worship and at schools. There's a difference between public space and private space. So a couple things. A lot of masajid are so small that they just have one room or two rooms and it's all public space. But if you have a full built out, purpose-built mosque, then you'll have your entrance and it's open to the public. Some masajid I've seen have a code where people literally can't get in unless they're escorted by someone who knows the code or they have the code themselves. And that would be more of a private space, even in the prayer area. And generally, of course, during services, those are left open anyway. But most masajid will have an office space, some kind of private space. So if you do have people who could be at risk of deportation or that kind of thing, or are nervous about an ICE raid and just don't even want to be in a situation where they have to interface with law enforcement, you do have the ability to mark between public and private space, whether it's the imam's quarters, a library, a private space. Let's say you have a dormitory on campus, where people can stay the night or rent facilities, things like that. Those can be safe spaces for people, because if ICE does approach your house of worship, and this is for any house of worship, they have to have a warrant and they have to be invited in. And one trick that needs to be exposed and thought through is if the warrant is signed by an ICE official or by a judge. If it's signed by an ICE official, it will look very, very official and it will look, legit. but it has to be signed by a judge to be enforceable. So sometimes ICE officials will create a warrant on an ICE letterhead and then have one of their own people sign it. But because it wasn't signed by a judge, it's actually not an executionable warrant in that someone can search your facility. So always check that. And this is a very specialized topic. So I would highly recommend, especially larger mosques and centers, community centers, have one person, reach out to CARE, reach out to the ACLU, reach out to any immigration lawyers groups or refugee and immigrant rights coalitions you may have in your state, and have one or two people trained who will be on site on a regular basis should ICE show up at your door, so that you can have an expert come and interface with them before you would let them in or execute a warrant. The next thing about space, so we covered safety, we covered private versus public space, and then we covered the user or visitor experience. This is something I think is really important that we need to think through, because you're going to have more people on a regular basis coming in and out of your facility. I want you to think through about how to have equal access for men and women, or at least a non-insulting experience for our sisters. I have seen, her name is Hind Mackey, and she has a blog that's all about the women's entrances. And some of the things on there are just downright embarrassing. There's a masjid in my state where the women's entrance literally were the storm doors, like tornado doors into a cellar or into a basement, where the men got to come in through the front door of the building. So they would literally have to bend over, pick up these giant metal, doors to protect you from a hurricane, and then go down steps from the outside grassy area into the basement where the women were kept. So let's do our best to make sure our facilities are welcoming for all our brothers and sisters. Speaking of that, I want you to think of your facilities in terms of cleanliness. Do you have a plan to clean hard to reach spaces, bathrooms, all that stuff because of the heavy usage? And what is the presentation of the masjid overall? Are there special Ramadan decorations up? Does it reflect the spirit of Ramadan or the ease of access that would be needed for someone who might be handicapped or have some disabilities? And do we have ease of exit? Now, this is really important. Should there be an emergency, can people exit the building quickly and safely? That is a huge issue, even for a lot of purpose-built masajid. Sometimes the way we put our shoes to the side and stored becomes an issue where it's really hard for people to leave the building and then be able to run or get to their cars without their footwear. Um, and then lastly, from an outsider's perspective, someone who's not a Muslim, how does it overall look and feel? And you might bring someone over who's friendly and who can give you honest feedback about the experience, just so you can see things you wouldn't normally see, because we get into Ramadan mode and we just kind of accept everything and move as fast as we can. Continuing on the idea of spaces, I want us to think through this idea of the perimeter. Is it fenced? Does it have um, shade or the ability for people to hide? Think of the assassination attempt at the golfing course for against President Trump. That person was able to set up a rifle and zero in on the president. Now, he was caught and the attack was thwarted before anything could happen. But a lot of our facilities sometimes, the grounds aren't kept or there's big trees without lighting. Um, and then sometimes, even in worst case scenarios, I've been to a masjid once where it was a converted building and it had this giant set of windows where you could just see the whole congregation from a hill with trees. And that's just a dangerous situation, especially in these times. So we should, address situations like that. Does it provide cover for a would-be attacker, is what I'm really getting at. Does it have a clear view into the congregation? That's another thing to think about. Now, I also want us, again, to keep focusing on spaces. So one of the things to consider is entrances. Is there a main entrance? Is there signage that people will understand and that is clear? Do we have, when it comes to entrances, ease of access for traffic? Do you have a traffic control team? Is there security even at the very entrance? What kind of signage does it have? So, like, is it the situation where people could wander into the facility just seeing a bunch of cars and thinking there's a party going on? Or, does the masjid or the center actually have a big sign that reads also in English for someone to know that they're entering into a mosque? Are the security and traffic people or receptionist people in the building, are they trained to be courteous? Do they have a flow of traffic plan for peak times when people are coming to break their fast or to make it to prayer or to leave? Do we have traffic flow mechanisms to make that run as smoothly as possible? And then other things to consider on this note are things like, do you have dedicated spots for your staff? Do you have a dedicated spot for the imam and a plan to keep them from being double parked in? Do you have a spot for new mothers? Do you have a spot for handicapped people? And do you have a spot for first responders and emergency personnel to be able to access the facility just in case? Because one of the worst things that could ever happen is something tragic, someone's injured, someone's attacked, and then first responders couldn't get in there in time to help him. And we don't want to have a situation like that. So again, we have to think through things like controlled access mechanisms, gates, lighting in the parking lot, lighting around the perimeter, having clearly designated spaces for the elderly, for mothers and staff and first responders, also for deliveries. Um, do is there lighting if you have a large grounds in the walkways? Do you have people who will walk through and patrol the spaces regularly so that you can ensure your congregation's safety? Are there obstacles or hazards in the walkways where kids or elderly people could trip and fall? How does your space affect your neighbors when extra and overflow parking comes? Are you going to have people parking on the lawn of a house that's maybe 20 feet away from the mosque? That's a huge problem. Not only does it cause towing for the person who parks there, but also it causes a massive annoyance and anger towards the Muslim community from residents who are getting their lawns trashed or people blocking them in or parking on their space unexpectedly. This is one of the reasons outreach to neighbors is so important. The other thing is, do you have an overflow space designed in case you have a popular event or more people come than your facility normally handles? And then gardens are hidden and poorly lit areas. Do you have a plan to address those? Finally, do you secure all your entrances? There's a lot of masajid that I've been to throughout my life where there's so many entrances and exits that people are just coming in and out. The doors are slamming during prayers. It's hard to focus, and it's also a major safety concern. Um, and then, do you have a policy for who can make announcements or if printed flyers are allowed? All of this is public relations for your key group, your first key groups, the staff, the volunteers, and the musalliin. This is all directly related to them, and this helps establish mutually beneficial relationships because you have to communicate those things both to the musalliin and have your staff trained. Is there a plan for restrooms? In the restrooms, for instance, have you put up women's safety information and anti-abuse information? So, for instance, signage that tells people there's helplines in case they're in an unfortunate domestic violence situation. Um, is there an emergency plan if there's a toilet overflowing? Do you have someone set up and facilities to handle that right away so it doesn't go beyond what it would have to? And then the shoe area, guys, the traffic flow through the shoe area. I know I already talked about this, but I didn't address one point. One, ease of use, how to get in and out, drop your shoes off quickly and pick them up quickly is always a problem for masajid. Um, but the cleanliness is an unaddressed problem because a lot of times it might be snowing, it might be rainy, it might be muddy. People track in a lot of stuff, and then you're taking your shoes off and walking in your socks. And it's just an unpleasant experience for folks. So if you can look at that, think it through, streamline it, it makes the community feel so much better. And then again, just wanted to make sure that we're looking at dormitory spaces if there are overnight facilities, beds, cots, showers, that kind of thing at your facility, how to prevent people from hiding in there, staying in there without being allowed to, having a sweep at the opening and closing of your facility each and every day of Ramadan, and then keeping kitchen areas clean, and then, of course, maintaining the prayer hall. So that's a whole lot about spaces, and I ran through it quickly. Pretty much everything I'm talking about, if you message me through the comment section, I will be happy to do a quick one-on-one with you guys as long as my schedule allows it. So if you are interested in learning more about these topics, just put the word interested in the comments and the topic, and I'll reach out to you. I also want us to think about our programming. Is it age appropriate? And when I mention this, I'm saying a lot of masajid have the children as an afterthought. They pick the smallest room and they put a TV in there and they just play, cartoons and videos for them. And they have, some sister who may or may not be great with kids, just trying to get them all to be quiet and stay in the room and watch TV while everyone else prays. It's not ideal. I've been to a mosque in Houston called Clear Lake Islamic Center. They have an indoor playground that would put to shame any McDonald's or it's a IKEA levels of coolness. It has multiple levels that you can climb, slides, ropes, all these things, and it's padded and safe, and the kids love it. And during Ramadan, they have activities for each kind of age group of children. So the youngest kids go to the playground and have other activities there, and then it goes more sophisticated in different activities as the ages go up. And this is so awesome because it gives mothers a chance to actually just pray without having to think about their kids, or mothers and fathers not having to pawn their children back and forth between prayers. And then the kids eventually end up running through the lines, making a mess, disturbing other people. Um, Again, we want our masajid to be child friendly and the congregation to be trained on encouraging children to feel welcomed, no matter what they're doing, but at the same time, let's be realistic. Ramadan can be a stressful time for people. So let's think these things through about programming. I also want to think about programming to accommodate the elderly. Do we have space set up for them rather than just random chairs that people have to put to the side to be able to stand on? Is there a cry room or a nursing area for young mothers? Um, do we have event programming that addresses things like an interfaith visitor or someone trained to give a quick Islam 101 presentation or to do translation? And then finally, have we already thought through your Khatam Quran night and when it will be and how you're going to get there? And basically, if you're going to do fundraising that night or not. And then lastly, during the last 10 nights, have you thought about Iftikaf, people who want to stay the night at the masjid? Are you going to make announcements to make people aware of the do's and don'ts, um, and kind of build that up over time and make sure that they're not bringing food into the prayer hall if that's your policy? Then I want you to think about streaming lectures or streaming services from the masjid. Now I know there's a whole fiqh issue, and I don't believe it's possible to follow Taraweeh prayers remotely. So my point here isn't for that. My point is, even if you do stream it, it's for people who might be shy to come to the masjid, have some kind of issue, like they might be worried about immigration status, or they might be worried about their safety, that they could still get some of the spirit of Ramadan just by tuning in. So that's another thing to think about. Um, and then are you planning volunteer appreciation and recognition events? Again, I was talking about how the volunteer team and your staff are the most important people in your organization when it comes to user and customer experience. If you treat them well, they will treat everyone else well and they'll be proud to work there. The last thing you want is a volunteer to leave because they felt unappreciated and then tell other people, I volunteered, I spent all this time at this mosque and they never said thank you. All they did was give me more work. You don't want to have that situation happen. In fact, you want to give them awards publicly, thank them publicly, even maybe give them gift cards for their time, some way to make them feel really appreciated. Same thing with your staff. And then, have you thought about doing targeted charity nights, a fundraiser for Palestine, a fundraiser for Sudan, a fundraiser for a local cause that needs support? Building those nights in on an organized calendar as soon as you can and repeatedly introducing them to the Musallin during Salah, well, not during the Salah, of course, but in between the prayers, will make those events so much more successful and make your community very empowered. And then again, make it where your multiple publics are impressed with the organization and the level of thoughtfulness your community has done. Next, I want you to think about, do you have a sister congregation? Meaning like a church, another masjid, a synagogue, a gurdwara, a temple that you guys have a relationship with, that you've done events with. You would want to do something where you let them know about Ramadan. There's been some fantastic history, like in Memphis. Um, the largest Islamic center there started in a prayer space of a church. And then because they had purchased the land next to the church, and to this day, the church and the mosque have fantastic relations, even had toyed with the idea of building a bridge over the road so that members of both congregations could easily speak with one another and not have to cross the road unsafely. So, all of these things are things that are proactive when our community starts to think about public relations. Another thing is that in public relations, I want us to really understand that we are cultivating culture by our leadership, our lack of leadership. Now, I've often said on this channel and on social media that Muslims have a leadership problem. For the most part, we have managers. We have people that chase relevancy. So they put their finger in the wind and they kind of test which direction the wind's going, and then they go that way. So they're not actually leading. They're trying to manage their community. They're trying to stay relevant and make everyone happy, but it's because they don't have any vision on where to build the community or what makes them different, what services are lacking in the community, how they can fulfill that. So again, this is not an issue of shaming anyone. This is an issue of addressing a reality. So your masjid can stand out just by doing, and we'll address this in a little bit, what's called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and finding out, what parts of the Muslim community are underserved, what things aren't happening that you might have the ability or the talent to provide. This kind of thing helps you create a culture. Another thing that helps create a culture, and I've seen this in masajid across the United States, but very few. For instance, in College Station, there's a masjid there. If they don't recognize you, if you're a visitor, at the end of services, they bring you to the front and welcome you to the community, announce your name, and then whoever leaders from the mosque are there will introduce themselves. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's also really cool because you get to know people immediately. So doing things like that, telling your congregants that, to smile is sunnah, um, always reminding people of the values of the masjid, whether it's a safe place for women, whether it's a place to empower the youth, whether it's a place where, like the Clear Lake Islamic Center, their motto is learn, pray, and play. So they want it to be a place of knowledge, a place of salah, and a place of fun. Um, so unled communities have crazy incidents. So when you're not leading your community, you'll see it because you'll see fights break out, like in the food line where one person feels cut off by another, or someone from one ethnic group, let's say an Arab, is sick and tired of getting South Asian food that's too spicy for him every night, and he'll complain, and then people get heated. You'll see weird stuff happen, and that's because you're not leading. If you're leading your congregation, you're setting the culture, you're reminding people of the etiquette of being in the mosque, the opportunity ahead of them, why controlling their anger is part of Ramadan and why it's part of fasting. All of those things are proactive measures that generally prevent that from happening. Now, if you do have a rather crazy or abrasive person that's always abrasive, no amount of leadership can change that except for like one-on-one and that person wanting to change. But as a general rule, if there's not mutual respect, if the youth don't like to be at your masjid, if no one's using complimentary or aspirational language, then you're not a leader. You're generally going to be a manager, and you're not going to be as successful as you could be. And all it takes is a switch in your mind to start being proactive about seeing the things that you want to see, and by teaching and encouraging that from the community. And I really want to focus on the idea of creating culture through aspirational language. Aspirational language means kind of like goal setting with your community. You could do a forum, you could have a town hall. And again, this might be for next Ramadan. It could be a debrief from this Ramadan. What does the community want to see? And then you use that as an opportunity to craft that kind of culture building effort that will transform your congregation. So a couple of things about non-Muslim visitors that's related to culture. We should be teaching folks that non-Muslims are going to come most often not knowing what to expect, not knowing how to dress, not knowing how to act, not knowing to take their shoes off. So that's why it is so important to build a culture of tolerance, a culture of education, and a culture of welcomeness that will educate people who show up. So you have to be able to accept someone who's not a Muslim on the grounds that they came, rather than turn them away from our community, or even worse, create an enemy to our community because they felt disrespected. And one of the things about that is to make sure that your website, uses good English, that it's grammatically correct, that it's understandable, that your social media posts do the same, that Google Maps, Yelp reviews, Charity Navigator rankings are all accurate and easy to use. Then again, when it's talking about creating culture, I want you to think about training your security for what to look for in unusual guests, people that might be in need, someone who might be in an abusive situation or an impoverished situation, how to assess, what the person needs, how they can be helped, or if that person could be a threat. And your security team should really brush up on what's called de-escalation techniques, how to talk down people from anger, from violence, from hatred towards Muslims. Those are important skills, but also to reinforce that your security team should always also trust their gut. If they feel something's wrong, most likely it is. And one of the best things that people can do is having multiple people in a security team. So someone who's really good at de-escalation through verbal and nonverbal communication, and another person who immediately starts recording the incident. because having cameras tends to be a deterrence in and of itself. And then a third person, once the decision's made to record something, it should also be to call for help. That could be security. It could be for, mental health support from the city that you live in. It could be a number of things. But the idea here is to think through people who might need financial support, people who might need mental health support, people who might represent a threat to the community. And I want to spend a little more time on people who might be a threat to the community. They might pose as someone interested in Islam and wanting to get to know the community, but you'll see them taking pictures, especially of entrances, especially of security measures and devices. Those kind of people you immediately want to make sure someone checks and, takes outside of the community and talks to them privately, because you don't want someone casing your facility to plan something nefarious later on. Now, we're going to talk about media relations, because I know that's what most people thought when I said a PR plan for the Muslim community. First and foremost, we should always avoid impromptu interviews. Someone shows up in your face with a camera. You don't want to say no comment, but you do want to say something like, what outlet are you with? Oh, you have a blog? What's the name of your blog? And then when you get the information about them, you ask for the excuse me, you ask for their name, ask for their contact information, ask for the information for where they're posting their media to, whether it's a legitimate news outlet, whether it's independent media, whether it's just some guy trying to go viral. You want to find out from them. And then the keywords here are to say, I'm in the middle of something. I didn't expect you. I will get back to you in a moment. Please go wait over there, or let me call you and invite you back at the appropriate time. This will buy you time to find out, check their resources, check out if they're legitimate. And then the thing you can do as that conversation happens, they start to give you their phone number. They start to tell you about their contact information, is like, and what were you interested about with our community today? And then that kind of opens the door for them to tell you why they came. That's another question you can ask. Why are you here and reporting on our community? Those kinds of things will give you insight into at least what they're telling you that they're doing with the media. Um, and there'll be people who are very good at pushing back and saying, no, we're only here for this moment. We need your question on this. And what you can always do is say, I understand your question. I'm not the spokesperson for this community, or I'm not prepared to talk to you at this moment because I have a pressing issue inside. Can you wait here for a moment? I'll be back. Those things are ways to get out of and what I call an ambush media situation. If you do have someone calling you asking for permission, again, never start answering questions or getting right into interview mode. And for those people who want specific info on this, I do have a one sheet for handling calls that you can download to your phone. And then while you're talking to them, you can just pop it up as a PDF and then read from the sheet as you're talking to them. So what you can do in that situation is use those same kind of probing questions, taking control back of the conversation, finding out who they are, what their outlet is. And the key for both scenarios, whether it's a media ambush, where they're there with the cameras rolling from the time that you meet them for the first time, first contact, or whether they're calling in to seek permission or get information, all the time you want to say, what is your deadline? And I will get back to you before your deadline. Now, getting back to them may be a refusal to do the interview or to let them film, because again, mosques are generally private property, so you don't have to allow anyone access to your facility. However, if you do a no comment or interview denied, realize that they will report on you without your voice. So that is something to take into consideration. And again, me or local public relations professionals who are experienced, even CARE chapters or MPAC or other Islamic advocacy organizations, like in Tennessee, they have the American Muslim Advisory Council, also known as AMAC. All of those are incredibly valuable professional resources that can help you through this situation. But the key, just to recap, is to find out their information, specifically their name, their station or news outlet, and then ask why they were interested in your facility or your community or what the story is about, and then let them know ask them what their deadline is, and let them know that you'll get back to them before that. Finally, you should train up a person who can be, or at least a few people who can be spokespersons for your facility, for your masjid. And it generally should not be the imam or the president of the board. It should be a designated spokesperson. That way you can leave the imam or the president of the board or other people with an authoritative title to come back into media in future events, or to come in a special situation, or to be an add-on to reinforce your spokesperson's role. Now, that means you do have to give someone a title like community outreach or community relations, for the mosque. You give someone an official title and then that empowers them. But understand, you're trusting that person to then represent your mosque. And the most important thing under trusting someone with that title is they have what is called message discipline. Now, message discipline is so important because good interviewers are going to make you feel very at home when they talk to you. Good interviewers are going to help you take your guard down, get you to open up, get you to talk freely. And message discipline is the idea that no matter how natural or how freely you're talking, you always stick to the main talking points and the underlying values of the message you're trying to get to. I call this talking about shared values or universal values because that's what is going to make sense and resonate with your audience. So, for instance, if there was some issue about parking annoyance from the Musallin, the people attending your mosque, in the neighborhood next to your mosque, what you could say in an interview situation like that is everyone wants their private property rights to be respected, and no one appreciates people parking without permission in front of someone's home, whether it's legal or not. We have reached out to our neighbors to let them know Ramadan was coming and to report directly to us if they're having issues so that we can help educate our community to avoid those situations. And we've proactively reached out to our community to let them know where parking is acceptable and where it's not. And we hope that we can always work with our neighbors to make the situation better. That way, you're talking about aspirational language, but you're also talking about shared values because you're putting yourself on the same side as someone complaining. And in reality, no one, for the most part, chooses to be a jerk in those kind of situations. They're generally thinking, I'm late or I'm in a hurry and I need to park. There's a space here. I hope it's okay. And then they run. So we need to start thinking through proactively situations that our mosque and that our facilities could face, and then training people on how to deal with those, both preemptively through public relations with your neighbors, and then also preemptively by training spokespeople in case something like a complaint like that happens to get into the news. Um, and this will actually do a few things. It'll help you create your PR goals. So a PR plan normally is one overall plan, which has many smaller contributing to a main goal effort. So you could think of it as like a plan with a bunch of mini plans. So when you're creating your PR goals, this is the first foundational step here. You want to create an effort that will say increase donations or offer a new value to your constituents. Then you want to think about how to improve staff and volunteer morale. Now we're kind of coming full circle with a lot of this. Then we want to think about increasing our membership and donor um, recruitment and retention so that people aren't one-time donors, they're reoccurring donors, and that the people who come to your mosque, your congregation is growing because that's a good problem to have. Then you want to improve relationships with other communities that your center already has relationships with. So this could be the sister congregation, sister masjid, neighborhoods, businesses. If you have businesses right next door to you, your mosque should not be unknown to those groups. And then finally, you also want to think about how to find allies and inoculate them against possible crises in the future. So what I mean here is like having a relationship, let's say, with the fire department, your local police department, and that could be as simple as making a phone call, taking them an iftar meal for their nighttime staff, and then introducing yourself, having them come and get recognized, maybe give them an award for community service at your masjid in front of the whole congregation. After things like that happen, you can generally ask them to increase the patrols around the mosque during prayer times. And all that would be for them is a very light lift, but it makes a huge difference, is just to be visible so that people who would be having ill will to your community or criminals wanting to like break into cars looking for valuables, that would actually be a deterrent for that. And while you build that relationship, you can also ask for leniency, for instance, on parking tickets and stuff during Ramadan, and that they could help you identify repeat offenders. And then that way you give the community a chance to be educated instead of towed and ticketed right off the bat. Um, or it could be your goal could be something like expanding a capital campaign. Maybe your masjid is too small for its congregation and it's always a battle. People are coming in and out and people are starting to not come anymore and the reputation is going down because your space is just too small. So you have to think about what your goals are and then you have to think about how do you close what's called the perception gap. So when it comes to public relations goals, you have to realize that every individual person will have a certain specific perception of you and your organization. And what you want to do is make the organization's reality and their perception have as little difference between them as possible. So that only comes from getting people to give you honest feedback and for you to have actual goals and a realistic view of the services you offer. Again, that is the nuts and bolts of public relations. So, how to do public relations? You have to do research. Now, this is the point in the video where a lot of things that I'm going to say from here forward might apply to next Ramadan, but knowing what they are can help you identify trends this Ramadan. So it's still really important for you to look through the information and try to grasp it. First, you want to do what's called a SWOT analysis. That's a really great way of starting your research. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, strengths would be anything that your masjid or community does well, things that are distinctive, that set you apart from others, or that are just, like um, there's a woman from Houston named Angela Blanchard, and she runs and has run some of the largest nonprofits in America and some of the most successful. And then the slogan I took away from her, which was beautiful, she said, "You can't build on broken." So when Angela Blanchard's organization used to set up a new facility or service to a community, they would sometimes spend over a year getting to know the community just to identify the strengths of that community. And then they would celebrate them with the community in order to build goodwill. And then they would build upon making those strengths even stronger or expanding that strength into being positive for more people. So you have to look at the things your masjid excels at. It could be that you have a resident scholar that is phenomenal, a great speaker, and that is incredibly knowledgeable and helps improve people's lives. So finding ways to increase your scholar's reach, increase people's awareness of his service, that could be an easy way your masjid embraces its strength and builds on it. Then you also have to look at your weaknesses. It could be that your facility has terrible sound, and that's always a problem. So making a fundraising drive specifically to upgrade your sound system. And there's a ton of weaknesses that Masajid could have. It could be cleanliness. It could be um, issues of access. It could be that the sister section is tiny and needs a complete overhaul, and the building needs a capital campaign to expand it so that you can facilitate the women who want to attend the masjid. And then you have to think about opportunities because strengths and weaknesses will show you opportunities. But also, another place to look for opportunities is what services does the Muslim community in your area lack? Who who's not doing things in your part of town? Is there something strong in another part of town that people wish they had in your part of town? So, for instance, something like this could be um, you could set up a waqf or an endowment for your mosque, and it could be through the form of a business. One of the ones I like to think about for the mosque I'm on the board of is to build a business like, say, a laundromat that could be a source of employment for someone who needs help, and then also a source of income for the masjid. And because we're in a strip center, our mosque could literally have and purchase a space right next door to us to run a laundromat. And then that becomes a win-win-win. You get to hire Muslim people who need help. You get to serve the community in a way that is lacking in that particular neighborhood. You have to kind of also do the research for your own area. And then you also get to ease the burden on your donors by having a business that feeds into your mosque, assuming that it would be profitable. Then lastly, you have to look at threats. Now, I've already addressed some of the threats that I see as universal right now because of the executive orders coming from President Trump and the ICE raids that have been happening. I am very concerned that there will be a lot of attention on Muslims during Ramadan. And that's why I spent so much time early in the video talking about public versus private space. But thinking about threats, threats could also be emerging competitors that are siphoning off your congregation. It could also be downward trends where your quality of the sermon or you don't have a competent imam to lead the tarawih. There's a ton of things that could be something that will leave a negative feeling or sentiment in your audiences. So identifying those gives you the full picture. And then to address those, everyone here knows this term is called SMART goals or SMART objectives. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but just for those who may not know, the letter SMART is an acronym. And that is specific for S, measurable for M, attainable for A. Um, just for attainable, making sure your goal is realistic, and then relevant, meaning that it actually helps your key audiences, your congregation, your staff, and then that would be for R. And then lastly, time bound, meaning you have to execute on them or else it's no good. It has to be something that can be achieved in a certain amount of time. So after that, I want us to explore, and we're wrapping up the video here, PR tools. Um, so you have a number of tools available to you, whether you know it or not. First and foremost is your official organizational communications channels. This could be a Facebook page. It could be your website. Could be if your masjid has a video blog or a written blog. It could be, you know, um, any type of official way to reach your congregants, your email list, WhatsApp groups, all of these things are official organizational communications. That's one of the tools that you have. Another one is media outreach. So this could be if there is, let's say your masjid is predominantly South Asian and predominantly Pakistani, and you live in a city that has a Pakistani radio show. And Ramadan's coming, and you want to reach that portion of your congregation with a specific event, you do media outreach. You send a press release or you send an interview availability to that station saying, hey, we have this innovative program, or we're doing a celebrate Pakistani food night on the 23rd night of Ramadan, and we want to invite the whole community. Or you're doing one of the things I always wanted to see done was a baklava competition in a certain community where you could have like the Turks versus the Egyptians versus, and you could have, like your local elected officials who aren't Muslim be the judges. So things like that are fantastic opportunities for media outreach. Then you might want to do influencer marketing. So let's say you have a really popular Muslim social media person in your town who has a big following, or you have, like a news anchor who's Muslim or is friendly to the Muslim community, or you have an all-star athlete, someone like Hakeem Olajuwon, or any of the younger people playing in professional sports. That would be influencer marketing, where they could do something at your mosque, at your facility, that would bring in an audience. And then, of course, you have social media, and there's a whole thing for that with social media and search engine optimization. Then you have the ability for your board or your executive director or your imam to draft op-eds about the meaning of Ramadan or about things that your masjid is building or doing as new services. And then finally, you have what's called press releases, which is just general media outreach, kind of like throwing bait out into a pond, seeing if any fishes, like your local Fox, ABC, NBC channels are interested, or you could reach out to, radio like NPR or independent radio. So when you put it all together, you go back to the 5 W's and the H. Again, the 5 W's are who, why, what, where, and when, and then the H is how. So I hope that you do a number of things. You can also hire a PR firm to do a PR audit of your organization. And a good PR audit will include all of those media channels we were talking about. Also, we'll come by your facility, look at it physically, interview a couple people during high traffic times like congregants, and it will be confidential, where they will tell you, this is our assessment of your website. This is our assessment of your social media channels. This is our assessment of how your congregants feel about you. This is our assessment of the way your facility presents. So a good PR audit can give you invaluable resources. And then at the end of the day, putting it all together is as simple as reaching out to someone who is a public relations professional or an activist in your community who wants to learn. And you can also reach out to me, and I can check my network for local people who can help you, or I can give you some free consultation due to my limited bandwidth. Just put it in the comments below. And I hope you have a blessed Ramadan, a safe Ramadan, and that we all get the full benefit from the ideas in this video, and more importantly, forgiveness during the month of Ramadan, and bring our families, our communities, our hearts together and advocates for and people of peace and justice in the world. God bless you all. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Issa. Okay. Issa? Yes. Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway, convert to Islam, defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future, a more sophisticated approach.